Do you see the world of selling shifting around you? You probably do, because I can tell you for a fact that your fellow sales peers definitely do. Now, the gurus say that the world of selling is changing, but they don't cite good data to really support those changes. They just say that it's happening. And that has driven me crazy as a sales strategist for so many years. So I finally decided to put my social sciences degree from Harvard to work. And I decided to get real data into what's actually happening. So what we did is we surveyed about 400 salespeople to get insight into what's really happening on the ground floor. And I want to share the highlights. By the way, for full info on the methodology or specific statistics, you can click the link below in the description to get all of that information. But without further ado, here are 18 of my favorite pieces of data from our Salespeople Perceptions and Top Performance Study. Check it out. Number one, at least 50% of your prospects aren't a good fit. Now, I've been saying this for years, and I've always known it to be true, but now I can see without any doubt that this is the case. In fact, looking at the study, 71.4% of respondents said that 50% or fewer of their initial prospects turn out to be good fits. And this is really powerful insight, because what it's saying is that your prospects are very likely to turn out to not be a good fit. And that's fine. That doesn't mean that they are a good fit, but they just disappear. No. What we're saying is that the data is showing that the majority, in most cases, of your prospects are not going to be a good fit initially. And so what that does for salespeople is that information should liberate us to realize that, you know what? We don't have to try to close every single person we're in front of. If you look at closing rates for most industries, right, those closing rates are at the highest in the high 20s and on the lowest in the single digits, right? So we need to understand that the majority of our prospects simply are not going to be a good fit. Let this data liberate you so that way you're not freaking out and trying to close every single person you get in front of. In fact, when you determine that that person's not a fit, move on. Number two, budget is the most common reason that stronger opportunities fall apart. Now, again, we always knew this, but now the data concludes that, as we saw in our data, 55% of respondents said that budget was either the first or second most common reason that stronger opportunities fall apart. And this is so true, right? We know this to be the case, but so often salespeople are missing the budget. They're not getting the real value in the conversation. So that way, by the time they actually get into that budget conversation, they're really fighting an uphill battle. And this is true for most salespeople. And so I think for you as the salesperson, what the takeaway can be is that I need to be stronger upfront in creating real value. So that way, by the time we get to the budget conversation, we're not fighting that uphill battle. Now, budget is always going to be an issue in sales. It's never going to suddenly just disappear as a concern. But what we want to do is make sure that we are stronger up front. We're creating that value so that way we're not fighting when it comes to discussing budget and price. Number three, most salespeople just aren't getting in front of enough prospects. According to our research, 66.7% of salespeople have reached out to 250 or fewer leads in the past year. That is a pretty shockingly low number for most types of sales. That means that the majority of salespeople aren't getting in front of anywhere close to the 250 plus prospects that they probably need to be getting in front of. Now, on the other side of the coin, we did determine that 15% of salespeople have reached out to over 1,000 prospects over the past year. So what the picture that we see here is that the majority of salespeople aren't reaching out to that many prospects. And then you do have this little group of people that are reaching out to tons of prospects. And so what we want to really think about as salespeople is, where do we really want to be fitting on that spectrum? Chances are we need to be getting in front of more prospects than we currently are in order to really hit our sales numbers. Number 4, most companies are providing at least a quarter of salespeople's leads. Now, I thought this would be interesting for most salespeople to understand that 77.3% of salespeople said that their company provides at least a quarter of their leads. So that means that the other 3/4 is on them to go find. But that really does tell us some insight about the types of organizations that we're working at, right? Are you at a company that's providing you more than a quarter of your leads? Are you at a company that's providing you way less than a quarter of your leads? These are the types of things that we want to understand when we look at the entire industry of sales and the types of organizations we want to be working at. Now, just because your company doesn't provide a quarter of the leads doesn't necessarily mean that they're stabbing you in the back. Maybe they're providing you with tremendous resources to get in front of those prospects. But we do want to understand that really most organizations are providing at least a quarter of the leads. So if your company isn't, then that might be a conversation that you should be having with senior management. Number 5, sales is getting tougher than before. This is something that I hear salespeople say all the time, but I never really had quantifiable data to really understand what's going on. And what we found is that 61% of salespeople consider selling harder or much harder than it was 5 years ago. This is really profound stuff. That means that the majority of salespeople are finding that today's marketplace is much harder than it was to sell, 5 years ago. And by the way, the economy has only gotten better in the past 5 years. So that means that there are other factors that are going into making the world of selling that much harder than it was 5 years ago. Understanding where you fit into that spectrum. Do you consider selling to be harder or easier than it was 5 years ago? If you think it was easier, if you think it's easier now, that's great. But if you're finding it harder, what is actually making it harder? Dig into that and then try to identify how can you solve some of those challenges on your own and get around some of those issues. Number 6, it's only somewhat more difficult to get in front of new prospects than it was 5 years ago. This is really interesting because I hear salespeople complain about how it's so hard to get in front of prospects these days because of, they don't answer their phones and they don't even respond to emails anymore. But what we actually found was that 54% of salespeople thought it was harder or much harder to get in front of prospects than it was 5 years ago. And so what we're seeing is it's only a slight majority of salespeople that feel this way. And so it does give us pause to realize that, yes, maybe prospects are answering their phones less, and maybe prospects are less inclined to respond to an email than they were 5 years ago. But there are so many tools out there that enable us to get in front of prospects that, the world of getting in front of prospects isn't necessarily that much harder. It's only a little bit more tricky. And so that just means that we have to be a little bit sharper. We need to be using those cutting edge tools, and we need to make sure that we're still getting in front of as many prospects as we need to get in front of in order to achieve our sales goals. Number 7, the phone is still our best tool in selling. 41.2% of salespeople said that the phone is the most effective sales tool at their disposal. This is a piece of data that I did not expect to see. This was simply not a response I expected. I expected people to say that email was better, or LinkedIn, or social media, or something. But I think this is a real wake-up call for all of us, is that, there are so many tools at our disposal. But the phone still really works. We still need to use the phone as a way to get in front of prospects, to connect with prospects, and to sell to prospects. It's such a reminder in a world that is so dominated by conversations about social media and email and marketing automation that, the phone really works. So don't forget about it. Number 8. The vast majority of salespeople barely ask for referrals. This one really hurts me because what we found was that 57.9% of salespeople ask for fewer than one referral a month. Less than one referral a month. And in fact, 40.4% report rarely ever asking. This is really, really upsetting to me because you know what? It's one of the easiest ways to grow your business. And yet, so few people are really doing it. In fact, what we found was that only 18.6% of salespeople actually are asking pretty much every single person they're in front of. And this is something that I've been teaching people for years to be doing, is that we want to be asking for introductions or referrals as often as we possibly can. And yet, very few people are actually doing it. And what I see this is this is a huge opportunity for those salespeople who want to up their game. Ask for more referrals and introductions than you ever have before. There's only 18.6% of people that are actually doing it. Get out there, ask for more of those referrals because you know what? There's no downside to asking. There's only upside and you will get more business. Number 9, most salespeople do not love their job. I was pretty taken aback by this piece of information, that only 17.6% of salespeople rated their job satisfaction as outstanding. That's a pretty low number. And it's sad to me that I've dedicated my whole life to helping salespeople be more effective, more successful. And yet only a small sliver are actually saying, you know what, I love what I do. My work really fulfills me. It is outstanding. 47.1% rated their job as just good. This is really a place where I've decided I can see more of where my life's mission needs to be poured into. Is I want to see more people feeling really good about their job. And now I know that I can't control all aspects of your job, and you can't control all aspects of whether you love your job. You could have a boss who's just a complete chucklehead, and you can't control that. But there are many things that we can control to make sure that we do get a higher level of job satisfaction. And we want to make sure that we're following through on that. As you'll see shortly, there's a strong correlation with job satisfaction and the amount of sales activity that we're doing. So there are going to be things that we can be doing to take control of our selling to ensure that we feel better about our job than really ever before. Number 10. Those salespeople who spend more time on sales-related activities enjoy their job more. So I gave you a little teaser, and here it is. People who spend 3 hours or less on sales-related activities have an overall job satisfaction level of about 3.45 out of 5. So a 3.45 out of 5. While people who spend 4 or more hours a day on sales-related activities actually have a job satisfaction of 3.8 out of 5. That's a huge difference when you really break it down. And it's really statistically significant. And so what we can take from this is that the salespeople who are really doing the sales activity are more likely to just be successful. And as a result of that success, they are having higher degrees of job satisfaction. Now, I know that my data wonks are going to say, well, we don't know that with 100% confidence. No, of course we don't know that with 100% confidence. But logically, that is what we see happening, is that people who are doing the sales activity are having more success and thus feel better about their job. My challenge to you is make yourself more successful. Follow through with that activity, and the data shows you're going to have a higher degree of job satisfaction. Now again, if you hate the company that you're at or you don't like your boss, right? These are problems that maybe we have to change in other ways. But if you feel like the fundamentals of your job are good, now it's time to really focus on improving the quality of your work so that way you improve ultimately that job satisfaction in a really meaningful way. Number 11, company culture and management effectiveness matter most to salespeople. Now, as this graph shows, company culture and management effectiveness were rated as the most important indicators, while base compensation was rated significantly lower. So what that tells us is that we need to, if we're a manager or we lead a sales organization, the company culture and the management effectiveness really, really matter. Because so often we're spending a lot of time focusing on compensation structures, and those aren't necessarily as important. They do matter. And you salespeople who are watching this are saying, whoa, 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 compensation matters, of course. But ultimately, the data shows that what matters most are the management effectiveness and the company culture. Make sure that if you are at an organization that doesn't have those two, then maybe you want to think about, hey, maybe I should be in a different place or in a different position. Number 12, even salespeople know that people don't like them. Now, you're saying, what? Okay, so here's what we did, is we asked salespeople to just use words to describe what typical prospects associate with salespeople. This is something that we've seen a lot of buyer surveys of what buyers think, but we haven't really done a lot of asking salespeople. And what we came back with was that the most common words that salespeople used to describe the average buyer's perceptions of salespeople were the following. And so the word cloud shows there were words like pushy, untrustworthy, annoying, time, greedy, right? These were the 5 most common words, and they were really bad words. And by the way, the word time, I don't think they were saying, oh, they're a great use of time, right? It was time suck. It's taking your time, right? What's incredible is that even salespeople recognize that they have a disadvantage the second they're in front of a prospect, which is that the prospect is likely to be guarded. The prospect is likely to have a negative connotation about salespeople already. And by understanding that, we know that we need to be that much better. We need to be that much more distinct. Because if we're not, we are going to be in that bucket. Because by the way, these ideas match up very closely with what buyers actually think when they're surveyed and you look at the same word cloud. It's pretty powerful. Number 13, most salespeople are not crushing it. Now, this may not surprise you, but I was pretty blown away that only 24.3% of salespeople actually exceeded their quota last year. I would have thought it would have been higher. Because, you know what, so many salespeople talk a big game and they act like they're so great at it. Yet only a quarter of salespeople actually exceeded their quota last year. And what this tells us is that the majority of salespeople really have a lot of work to do in order to get to that next level. Now, if you're watching this and you're saying, well, I actually fit into that category of people that did not exceed their quota last year. Well, you know what, maybe it was a bad year, or maybe this is something that you've been struggling with. Either way, we need to make sure that this year is the year that you exceed your quota. We need to make sure that you're implementing the strategies that will allow you to truly not just exceed, but exceed with flying colors your quota. Number 14, non-performers do a lot more pitching. This is something that I always knew logically and anecdotally, and I had seen so many salespeople struggle with this, but now having real hard data on this is so powerful. And what we found is that only 7% of top performing salespeople actually report pitching to prospects, while 19% of non-top performers pitch their offering or their services. This is a huge distinction. So basically what we see is that the non-performers are much more likely to pitch their services or their offering. And so what we want to do is recognize that the top performers are not doing that. They're not pitching their offering. Instead, what they're going to be doing, as you'll see, is they're engaging prospects in conversations. They're digging into their challenges. They're engaging them as an advisor, as an expert in their industry, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's what we got. Look at all the cool items and features and benefits that we have. Number 15, top performers are asking for a lot more referrals. Now, I always knew this to be the case, but now I see it in hard data. About 47% of top performing salespeople ask for referrals consistently. So that means every day or with every person they're in front of, right? That's a lot. Versus only 26% of non-top performers. This is a stunning piece of information. This shows one of the biggest differences between top performers and non-top performers is that top performers are simply asking for referrals consistently. They're asking for those introductions and referrals, and as a result, they're growing their businesses. So it doesn't even necessarily mean that their selling technique or their closing technique is that much better, although in many cases it is. What they're doing is they are consistently asking for more referrals. In fact, non-top performers were much more likely to report asking for referrals either never or rarely ever. This is just mind-blowing, right? We now see that one of the biggest differentiators between the two groups is simply the act of asking for referrals or never asking for referrals ever, which is what a lot of non-performers are doing. Number 16, top performers are surfing the web way less and are driving to way more meetings. This was one of my favorite and most unexpected pieces of information that came out of this entire survey, is that top performers are not only goofing around on the internet way less, which we would have expected, but they're also complaining that they have to drive to way more meetings. So here's the thing. While all salespeople spend about a similar amount of time on CRM and paperwork, top performers are much less likely to note that they are surfing the web as a main activity that they waste time on. So only about 12% of top performers versus 24% of non-top performers talk about the fact that they're surfing on the web. But also on the other side of it is that top performers tend to spend more time on driving to meetings. So 25% of top performers complained about the fact that they have to just waste so much time because they're just literally driving to meetings, while only 12% of non-top performers had any issue with driving to meetings. So what we see here are basically two consistent narratives. On the one hand, top performers are really busy, so they're not surfing the web. But they're also really busy because they're just driving to meetings. They're physically going to meetings. On the other hand, non-performers are doing a lot more wasting time just surfing the internet. And at the same time, they're not going to as many meetings. So they don't even have the opportunity to complain about having to drive to meetings. It's a profound distinction. Become one of those people that, you know what? I want to hear you complain that you have to spend too much time driving to meetings. Because if you're spending too much time driving to meetings, that means that you're going to meetings, and thus you're being successful. Number 17, top performers tend to spend more hours per day on actual sales activities. Really profound piece of information. What we found is that 81.6% of top performers spend 4 hours or more on sales-related activities. So that means activities like prospecting, going to sales meetings, presentations, proposal work, sales follow-up, all of that stuff. On the other hand, only 60.8% of non-performers spend 4 hours or more on sales-related activities. This is a profound difference. As this graph shows, there is a big gap after the 3 hours. What we see is that top performers are simply spending a lot more time on sales-related activities. The non-performers are simply spending less time on those sales-related activities. They're getting distracted, they're doing other things, they're surfing the web, or they're getting stuck in operations. Whereas what the top performers shows us is that the key to success here is simply putting in the time on those key sales-related activities. Hold yourself accountable to do a little bit more in terms of that sales-related activity. Number 18, top performers know that they are experts. What the data showed was that 51% of top performers report being seen as an expert in their field, while only 37% of non-performers see themselves as an expert. This is a really important distinction. I wasn't sure exactly how this is going to split out, but what we'll see is that overwhelmingly top performers see themselves as experts and understand that they are seen as experts by their prospects. So one of the biggest things that you can do to really be more successful is make sure that you're not being seen as that vendor. In fact, top performers were less likely to be seen as a vendor. Only 8% of top performers said that they were seen as a vendor, while 24% of non-performers said that they were seen as a vendor. The other thing to think about is even just the word salesperson, right? Only 7% of top performers reported being seen as a salesperson, while 20% of non-performers said that they were seen as a salesperson. Just the word itself connotates a negative mindset. Top performers are seeing themselves and are ensuring that they are seen by their prospects as the expert. So there are 18 of my favorite pieces of data from our Salespeople Perceptions and Top Performance study. I want to hear from you. Which of these ideas do you find most useful? Be sure to share below in the comment section to get involved in the conversation. And if you enjoyed this video, then I have an awesome free ebook on 25 tips to crush your sales goal. Just click the image right here to get it instantly. Seriously, just click right here. Also, if you got some value, please like this video on YouTube and be sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking right here to get access to a new video just like this one each week.